Thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Kenneth Chapman. I'm the VP of Market Research at D2L, and I want to talk today a little bit about some of the best practices that we know of and that we try to incorporate into our platform for personalized learning. As I said, I work at D2L. We make an LMS or a VLE called Brightspace, and the ability to personalize learning online is a major reason of why I got into educational technology almost 20 years ago. While I was an undergrad, I started working at D2L, an LMS company. I was coding in LMS while I was finishing a degree on it. And I've had the opportunity to learn from a lot of really great educators and a lot of amazing organizations around the globe over the last few years. For those of you that don't know much about D2L, we're an organization based out of Canada. We have offices all around the world, and we've been in business for about 20 years. We're a mission-driven company, and we've always existed to try to transform the way the world learns and to really advocate for good online learning practices. And then COVID-19 came around, and it kind of forced everybody into this transformation, whether we wanted to or not. So let's go with it. This is the time to really take advantage of reimagining some of the learning experiences that we provide and how we can take advantage of technology to really personalize that. If we're spending our time right now on creating really great engagement with our learners, building really great learning experiences for everybody that's learning online, this is going to have impact for an entire generation. And personalization in this learning experience is going to be one of the critical factors to getting that right. A lot of organizations went remote over the last 6 months or I guess less. And now it's time to get better. Now it's time to think about how do we build out equitable access? How do we build in some of these research-backed practices around personalizing learning and making it more engaging, but do it at scale and do it in a way that's practical. One of the things that we do a little differently at D2L is we decided to build a learning platform that could serve anyone throughout their life, however they're learning. Whether that's my 5-year-old that's using Brightspace for her learning right now, or whether that's myself who's learning in a professional environment. We try to create a platform that's flexible and that embraces the diversity of learners so that we can meet them wherever they happen to be in their learning journey. And we've learned over the years that while there's a really different way that we all work and act, there's still a very common human element to the things that we want to get out of our learning. And ultimately, personalization is trying to take potentially tedious activities and turn them into something more engaging and something that learners can connect with on an individual level. As a human being, everybody appreciates that, young or old. When we're more engaged, we put more energy, we put more of ourselves into what we're doing. And we're used to this. Gone are the days of going into a video store, for example, where all of the aisles have the same movies and media for everybody. We're used to our own Netflix page. We're used to seeing recommendations and highly personalized interfaces and choices put in front of us. And when learners meet an educational experience that doesn't give them that same level of personalization, they can disconnect really quickly. So we have a big opportunity in front of us and a big risk in not getting it right. When we don't do this well in our learning, it's deflating, it's disengaging, and ultimately it creates a risk for student success. And this is hard. This is really the opportunity when we think about personalizing to really embrace this idea of equality versus equity. Equality is giving everybody the same thing, regardless of whether or not it's going to meet their needs. It's really similar to what we're used to doing in the classroom, where it's more of a one-size-fits-all model. But when we're talking about personalization, we're talking about equity. We're talking about give each individual what they need to succeed. And that might be a little different for each person that we're talking to. That can be hard. That can be really difficult to scale. But that's the kind of thing that technology is really beneficial for. It can scale up. It can use rules. It can encapsulate things that you've learned over time and project that over really wide audiences that you couldn't do on a one-on-one in the classroom. So thinking about equity versus equality is a really important way to think about personalization. We're trying to personalize an experience so that each individual person gets what they need to be successful. And that's going to be a little different for everyone. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different biases. We come from different cultures, and let's embrace that. And that's not just true of the learners that we're trying to serve and how diverse and how different they are. Even the educators that we're trying to support and enable need to be have their diversity embraced. You know, some educators are going to be those power users. You know, they're going to adopt everything. They're going to experiment. They're going to try stuff. They're okay if it isn't smooth and understandable right out of the gate, but they want to use the most advanced, sophisticated stuff, and that's great. You know, students can benefit from that. But you've still got to cater to your first time instructors, you know, those educators that might not have done a lot of online learning before. They're new to this. They need something that's simple, something that's easy to onboard into, but that they can grow and get more sophisticated and adopt some of these practices of personalization that we're going to talk about here. At the core of personalization really is putting students first. It goes without saying, I think, but I'll say it. Personalization really starts and stops with the student-teacher relationship, the communication that they have, the listening channel that gets created with them informs a lot of the course design decisions and communication that gets put into technology like an LMS. But putting students first means you need to give them meaningful feedback. It needs to be meaningful in that it relates to the work that they supplied. It's timely, you know, it's not really a long time from something a student submitted to them getting feedback on their work. They want to know if somebody cares. It needs to be accessible. And by accessible, I don't just mean that if someone's visually impaired, they can use a screen reader. I mean, it meets their needs. If they only have a cell phone that they can access their learning from, then everything should work from their cell phone. If they have loud kids in the room, then videos should have captions on them for it to be accessible. A learner-centered and a personalized environment means it's motivating. It has elements of game mechanics. It gives them awards and badges. It schedules and recognizes their achievement. It nudges them when they're off course. Putting students first lets them have more of their own voice and active in their own learning. It lets them use video. Students love to bring video into their course and share themselves with through discussions with their classmates and provide rich examples of what they know how to do and demonstrate their knowledge. And lastly, the design of the delivery itself can, when it's competency-based, when it's based on mastery of learning rather than how much time an individual spends moving through content, is a highly personalized experience. You know, when it's adaptive and it's based on what the individual already knows and what they still need to learn, is a highly personalized experience. So when we go through a demo in this webinar, I'm going to try to touch on a lot of these different aspects and how they're put into practice. But again, these things are hard. And that's why technology can be so transformational here for us. So our platform, Brightspace, is built on this idea that rules define what a learning activity an individual gets next. A rule can be based on a score threshold that they've received in the past, a group that you've assigned them to, whether or not they've not done something over the last period of time. Highly, highly flexible framework to really dictate different learning paths for different individuals based on their behaviors, characteristics, or their demographics. And when we use this whole toolkit to personalize learning, you know, what do learners get out of it? They get an experience where they're interacting and they're participating in their learning experience rather than just consuming content. They have the opportunity to contribute to their own learning. When you're personalizing a course, you can give choice in how they want to demonstrate what they know, what types of activities they want to take on. And the learner has more of an effort to contribute to their path and to their knowledge. Learners get time and efficiency out of personalized learning. When they have a variable pace, when they can work at their own pace, it fits more into their lifestyle. If they get recognized for what they already know, they don't have to waste a lot of time credentialing themselves for something they already understand. And the last point I want to make before we actually see some of the product in action is how important data is for continuous improvement. Personalized learning isn't something that you're going to get right or ever finish with. It's a constant continuous improvement process. And it's part of an overall learning engineering process. You plan, you implement it, check the results, and you make changes. Do it all again, and you're reflecting all along the way. And I can't stress enough how important it is to combine the insight that you'll get from data with conversations with real people, especially the students themselves. So data is instrumental to inform the student advising and student services to support our learners. Remember, I'm talking a lot about academic stuff today, but student services that help learners with their mental health, with navigating different financial struggles they might be dealing with, all of those things are part of personalizing their whole experience at the institution as well. Okay, so let's see some of this in action. So here you see Brightspace coming up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to be hopping around a number of different examples of how we've got Brightspace implemented for different personalization examples here. And I like to kind of take the approach of crawl, walk, and then run. So crawl is some of the easier things that first time instructor might be thinking of doing. And so when I come into Brightspace, one of the simplest things is making sure that this environment is going to work on whatever device an individual might bring to it. So for example, if I'm using Brightspace here on a small screen, kind of like a phone, everything collapses down nicely. Everything's going to be available to me. It's using responsive web. Really important for accessibility and the fact that our data is showing us more and more students are taking their learning as on a mobile phone as a primary device. So when we personalize this environment, one of the first things we do is just acknowledge an individual as a person. My name is called out right away. Hi there, Tammy. Just a little recognition of me as a human being, of putting my name on the site, goes a long way to help it look like my environment, that this is my personal learning space. This isn't just something that's one size fits all for everybody. And the simple things to encourage for personalizing the environment are doing things like setting up a profile. This is where I can project what I want to show to others. I can see any awards and badges. I can share those with people. Links to my social networks, all of that kind of stuff that you're used to from online profiles. Can also set up personal settings and notifications. How do I want to learn about what's happening in the learning environment? I can download mobile apps that let me view content offline, that give me push notifications. I can choose what type of things I want to get notified for and when. Again, really making this fit into how I want to work and how I want to be notified. All the way down to which courses are actually most important for me. Maybe only my core curriculum I want to have send me all of these notifications, and my electives can be a little quieter. But that's a personal decision. That's something not everybody's going to agree on. Similarly, I can make a lot of decisions on my account settings. So you're going to have students that might be taking your course from different parts of the world. It's really, really convenient for them to be able to personalize that to the time zone that they're coming from, how they want their number format to look, their date format, what's the first day of the week. The simple things like not having to translate all of those things when you see an assignment due date goes a long way to reducing anxiety. And again, it feels like my environment, it's personalized. Simple things that don't really take any of the instructor time to do. But time to feedback is also an important aspect of personalization that a teacher can really take on early. So just like in person, the time it takes for you to give feedback to students on the work they submit is strongly correlated to student engagement. To really personalize the experience online, educators need to have tools that let them quickly identify which students have submitted work and ensure they can acknowledge that work and give them feedback. Students care that someone is looking at their work and that acknowledges that it's done. So here I can look as a teacher, all of the work that's been submitted to me across all of the courses that I'm teaching and all of the different activities that I've given my students. And I can see which ones are stale, and I can make sure that I'm getting that feedback out there as quickly as I possibly can. So when I look at a midterm assignment that a student Ashley has submitted here, one of the first things I can do to personalize that is just give her feedback directly on the work that she submitted herself. So here in her work, I can highlight, I can provide quick little annotations, I can draw on top of that, and I can highlight her work right in place. So it's connected to the work that she submitted. A really great great way to personalize this for Ashley is to use rubrics. So what a rubric does is it lays out a nice structured way of setting expectations on an assessment. It lays out different levels of completion, and it provides a way to give some examples of what does it mean to show mastery or to exceed mastery knowledge here. I can give highly customized feedback to an individual through the rubric. And what's really nice about this is I can show that rubric to the student before they actually submit the assignment. So they can actually get creative and think about the different ways that they want to demonstrate the different criteria I have for this assignment. So it sets expectations and it structures the assignment, but it can also allow the student to self-evaluate and to submit along with their actual work a self-evaluation using the same rubric that the teacher is going to use. Now, not only am I giving feedback to the student on their actual work, I'm helping them understand the process I went through in my feedback and where any gaps are or any differences are and how they self-evaluated. Highly, highly personalized experience that way. I can also do things like look at the past progress for Ashley. And as I'm giving her feedback on this assignment, I can point to, hey, on your previous assignment, I told you should work on your grammar or your composition. I noticed that you really improved here. So that idea of feed forward, like recognizing what they've done in the past and then trying to challenge them for future is a really powerful way to leverage feedback and personalizing that. Another way to do that is simply using video and capturing a little video clip of the educator just recognizing their work. I could put some text comments in here, but the camera goes a long way to again, making it feel like there's another human being that cares about your progress. St. Stephen's College on the Gold Coast of Australia is doing this really well. They're using rubrics to give structured feedback to their students as well, but they're also giving a 60-second audio clip from the evaluator that just goes along with that and gives them some extra feedback. Okay, another way we can personalize things is just by looking at students have different needs for completing some of the assignments and activities that you give them. One of the examples we hear all the time is in quizzing, where typically in a quiz you set some restrictions and you'd say, this quiz has 120 minutes to complete the quiz, but inevitably there's a student that requires extra time because they have different cognitive needs. Maybe they needed additional time for a due date, whatever the case may be. That can be a big headache if an educator has to go and create a whole separate quiz for that individual, and personalizing it for them doesn't really scale that well. So what can happen is right within this quiz that the whole course is taking, I can allow special access for just a couple people. So I can say, Ashley and Will, they're going to get a little bit of a different due date here. And I'm going to allow a different level of attempts for these people. And I can change the actual time limit as well. So I'll give them 150 minutes. So now everybody's being graded and getting feedback, and the data is being tracked on this quiz, and it's done once. But those individual students that needed things accommodated for themselves have that taken care of. They have that personalized way of interacting with this quiz, and they don't have the burden on their teacher of having to set that up for them each and every time. Okay. Another way to personalize things for students is to let them participate, to let them be creators. So here I'm in a science class, and I've got something called an activity feed in my class, and it's basically what you'd expect. It's a chronological list of posts, and typically the teacher or the instructor is going to do that to highlight some really cool stuff that they want students to look at. But you can allow for comments, so you can start to create a conversation that's happening within this activity feed that learners can participate in. And teachers that really want to get bold and let their students really bring themselves in and help create the course with them, they can actually allow for learners to create their own posts. So learners can add things to the activity feed, and it's like a shared space where everybody in the course is adding content and commenting on that. Again, it needs to be thought out and purposeful so that it doesn't get out of control, but can be a really effective tool to really engage and to help people bring themselves into the course. Okay, content. So with online learning, there's lots of opportunities to customize learning with different learning styles. presenting topics with a variety of text, images, videos, and interactive tools. Lots of different ways of how you choose what you want to put into your content or the course that you show your students. Really recommend having a variety so that there are alternative ways of looking at the same concept and of digesting the materials that you have. Different learners are going to resonate with different ways of representing the material. So for example, you might have in a specific unit some challenge material. So you might know that you've got some core information that you have in each unit, but you've got a group of students, a differentiated group that needs more challenge material. You know, they're kind of like the enriched group. And so every time you build out a module, you might use one of those rules that I talked about before and say, I'm going to put these students in a differentiated group, and I just want this content to be available to them. I could create these rules based on lots of other things. I could say only students that selected a checklist item that said they wanted to do this activity will get this activity. Now it's even more personalized where I'm actually choosing what my learning path looks like when I use rules in this fashion. The example I showed before was based on a group enrollment. We could do it based on people that have already achieved a learning objective. We want them to mentor those in a different group that have not achieved that. Really, really flexible, really, really powerful when the LMS is based around this concept of building out rules. Similarly here, we've got a different support group that gets additional materials. So these are learners that need a little bit of extra help. So they may have some remedial materials. Same kind of rule-based system works for them. And what's nice about that is it supports letting learners work at their own pace. They don't necessarily have to be forced to all do things at the same time. They can move quickly in areas that they understand, and they can slow down and take their time and even redo things if they haven't quite mastered what they're meant to master yet. And what's nice about that is it's easy to bring in lots of different alternative formats. So, you know, for example, if I'm going to go and create a unit on kinematic equations, I'm going to bring in some content. I might have, you can't see this, but if I'm going to drag in a couple videos, PDF file that's more like a textbook chapter, and some home experiments to be tried at home, all of which are really valid pieces of content, but they might be different for different learners. And so what's great about putting this in an online space is I can upload a variety of alternative formats. I can look at the data to see which ones are getting utilized most often, and I can prune and hone the types of content and alternatives that I support for my students. Okay, now I'm going to move more into the walk. So we've been crawling for a little bit. Let's walk a little bit more. So let's inform this by understanding where our students are at a little bit more with data. So for that, I'm going to look at the class progress tool. So here I can actually pick what data is most relevant for me in the course that I'm looking at today. You know, maybe I'm not really doing a whole lot with discussions, and I don't want to use that. That's not going to help me understand how I serve my students better. Maybe I want to look at login history. And so here I can see a quick dashboard of students in my course. And it's really helpful. So when I look at Elaine, for example, I can see she's starting to trail off. And sometimes personalization is just as simple as clicking on Elaine and reaching out to her and saying, Elaine, I've got some one-on-one time. You know, is there anything I can do to help you? I've got access to all of the data and everything that she's been doing in the environment to help me inform how I support her and what types of remediation or intervention she might need. But inevitably, as an educator, you get a sense of some of the trends, some of the risk behaviors, some of the indicators that someone's going to be really successful. And so, again, we've used an idea around rules to try to support doing that at scale. So we do something called intelligent agents in Brightspace. And what that does is it basically lets you create a communication that's rules-based. So one of the ways that we might do that is a welcome message. So as soon as the student first comes into the course, here my rule is if they're enrolled as a student, I want to do this just once, and I'm going to send an email that just says, welcome to chemistry. And it's going to say, you know, hello, Kenneth. It's going to be a great semester, and here's a link to my first lesson to get started. Great way to personalize that. It would recognize me for coming into the course, it used my name, and if for whatever reason I can't figure out where I start, it tells me right where I should go. Awesome. And that's a rule. I don't have to do that every time and monitor who comes into the course. The system's just going to do that for me. Same thing, maybe I want to reward posting to their first discussion. Again, somebody's watching, somebody cares, and it matters that you're participating and engaged in this online environment. This rule and this personalized communication that comes out of it is an effective way to do that. We can do it for pacing suggestions. You know, there may not be hard deadlines, but there may be best practices on when you should be at a certain point in your course. So here we've got an agent that's set up on a pacing suggestion. And so just to try to make it fun, you know, you can add a little cat image in there, or, you know, I can drop a Pokemon GIF in or something like that as well. Students really respond well to these types of fun little reach out and nudges, both for intervention as well as for reward. You know, there's a job well done you might want to provide just when a student gets through a certain milestone or reaches a specific threshold. But this rules-based way of recognizing it and personalizing communication as they go is a phenomenal way to scale up some of these practices that are hard to do otherwise. Okay. All right, moving into getting closer to running here. So personalization also means recognizing an individual's progress. Awesome way to do that is with badges or awards. So when I come into this course here, which is around workplace wellness, this happens to be a corporate example, I can see that there's some badges that are available to me, how I handle stress, and it tells me what I need to complete to get that. Badges are a really nice visual way to stick with person and let them see the achievements and share their achievements with others. They're really motivating. We're used to that idea from gaming, from trophies, etc. And again, using that rules-based sort of approach that we saw for communication and for releasing materials is what decides when do you actually get awarded this badge or not. So here for a course award, when I edit those, again, it uses the same rules that we saw before. So this badge is awarded when somebody achieves this learning objective. There may be multiple ways to achieve that learning objective, but ultimately when they've done that, they're going to get this badge. Okay, now let's run a little bit. So we can take this rules-based approach that we've been talking about, and we've seen it for creating notifications, we've seen it for awards, we've seen it for individual items, but we can design an entire course around this idea of making it rules-based. Ultimately, one of the best ways to personalize learning is through mastery-based learning or competency-based education. Lots of different terms being used for that, lots of different flavors of it. But basically what I mean is what is fixed for all students, what's true of all students is that they master or they learn what they're supposed to learn. What's different for each individual possibly is how long that takes them and how they go about doing that. It's kind of the opposite of the classroom model, where generally everybody spends the same amount of time in the classroom, sitting in their button seat, and the variable is what gets learned. Not exactly what we're after, right? So when we look at a competency-based education course, each module in this one is a learning objective. And when I start in the course, it lets me know at the beginning of every one of these modules, I'm going to receive a little knowledge quiz. And if I get more than 80%, I've demonstrated that I know that learning objective. I'm going to get the badge. I'm going to get recognized for that. And I basically tested out of that module. So for example, stress at work, there's a pre-assessment. There's a quiz that we give them. And in that quiz, there's a number of different learning objectives. And if they do well enough on that quiz, so and if they achieve the learning objective and the threshold on that quiz, then they're awarded a congratulations page. They've got the learning objective, understanding stress at work. If they didn't, so the rule here, if you've not achieved that learning objective from the pre-assessment, then you're basically going to get streamed into the core course. You haven't tested out of it, you haven't been exempted, and you can go through all of this additional content. So the release conditions, these rules decide then for each unit, whether you're done after that first quiz, because you've already shown you know it, why waste your time with more? Or if you need to go through and actually have some resources available to you and demonstrate your knowledge through potentially, in this case, a project, or to go back to that quiz and demonstrate the mastery of those concepts. And the cool thing about that, you still use awards. You can grant a badge after completing this learning objective. We saw that a second ago. And usually you would also bring one of those rules-based communications, one of those agents along with this. So I would get a congratulations that was automatically sent out. It would tell me I got the badge, and maybe there's a dancing Pikachu, who knows. And we can actually even take this a step further. So here we were doing prior knowledge assessments for each unit. In the anxiety unit, did the same thing, and as a pre-assessment. We can take that a step further, and lost my course. There it is. We can do the whole course with a prior learning assessment. So instead of doing it at the top of each module, we can say right at the beginning of the course, I'm going to give them a massive quiz, and it's going to be the prior learning assessment. Inside that quiz, there's a bunch of different learning objectives. And if they show mastery of 2 of those, then they've tested it out of 2 modules, and then we release the other 2 to them. If they show that they already know everything here and they've mastered the materials from that prior learning assessment, they're done. Give them the badge, time to move on to the next thing. So it can be a really effective way to personalize it, optimize time for learners that are strapped for that, particularly adult learners. Totally different way that we can be personalizing is letting the students choose what course of study they want to take, what clubs and groups they want to belong to. So, a lot of times we see the different courses that are assigned to students are done programmatically. They're done because I'm part of a degree program. They're done because I'm part of this cohort. But there's also tools that lets learners actually choose what they want to enroll in. So in this case, Irene is looking at some learning opportunities available to her, and she might want to choose to enroll in emotional intelligence and to learn more about that. These don't all have to be academic style courses. You can use this to personalize the experience so that Irene can take part in the chess club, or she can be part of a model UN. But providing some choice and some ability to opt in and partake in their own areas of interest is really important part of making this a personal learning environment and making it meaningful for an individual. Okay, 2 more things I want to show, and then I'm super excited to take some questions. So we talked about data before and how data can inform personalization. Wanted to show a couple examples of how we're using that in practice. So here we have a machine learning model that we call student success. I'll show all the names here. You can see they're all anonymized in case there was students behind my back in my office or anything. But what this machine learning model is doing is it's predicting the performance of a student based on their previous performance, based on historical data from previous offerings of this course, and based on their usage patterns. So right when I come in, I can see I've got some students at risk in my course. I'm at week 17, and the predicted grades for these students are quite low. They're underperforming. And it happens to be that they're underperforming on assessments for each of these. So what's interesting is I can jump into an individual and I can get a risk profile for them that's using this machine learning model. So there's a course timeline. Every week it's producing a new risk index. And I can see that, yeah, sure enough, Ethan is way down here. His grade is quite low. And his success index is kind of part way. There's some things that he's doing okay. He's accessing the course all right. He's looking at content. He's really underperforming on his assessments, even far below the class average. And potentially the reason why is if I look at his sociogram or a map of his social connections, he doesn't have any. And that's a really important insight for me to personalize the intervention here for Ethan. I can look at how I get a peer network for him. How can I support him having a deeper connection into the course? Because some of what we're doing in this later aspects of the course is relying on group work, relying on collaboration. And I can see that his risk is coming from that. So really interesting to be able to use data and some visualization of that data and analysis of it to inform how you can communicate with an individual student. And the instructor here might say to themselves, I haven't done enough in how I've designed my course to encourage in those first few weeks the creation of some of those learning networks and those social connections. And they may start to go back and look at the design of their course so they can mindfully build those in, so that when the time comes later in the offering where those are really critically important to success, as the data tells me they are, that I've got them ready, and that someone like Ethan already has that network in place before he demonstrates risk next time. Really powerful ways to use data and insight there. And then the last quick example I wanted to give on personalization is using an adaptive learning model. So here I've got an adaptive learning tool that's part of a course. So I have a whole course that I've looked at before, or like we've looked at before. So we've got a few different chapters and lots of different stuff that we're trying to teach to. But specifically, I'm trying to do a chapter review for chapter 1. And in this adaptive learning tool, what I do is I specify the learning objectives that are encapsulated in this chapter. So in this case, it's carbohydrate chains, plasma membranes, all kinds of good stuff. And instead of being deterministic and me deciding the individual content items and all of the rules on who's going to see which content item and how is that going to be delivered, instead an adaptive learning model here is just asking me for what's the learning objective, what's the concept or what do you want to teach as part of this, show me where to find the content. So in my case, it's this course. I'm going to let my students actually contribute content. I had an assignment in this course earlier that challenged students and said, if you were teaching this course, what do you think would be the best content that would reinforce some of these ideas that we're talking about in chapter 1? And now my adaptive tool is able to draw from those. And then I'm also using an open educational resources library. Lots of different things can be plugged in here if I wanted to. I can use YouTube, Wikipedia, library sources, publisher data sets. The important thing is that I don't have to curate the individual content items in here. The adaptive engine is going to cross-reference what's in this content repository to what's relevant to the learning objectives that I specified earlier. Similarly, I don't have to pick all of the different questions that I'm going to use. I'm just going to point to the questions that I want the adaptive engine to look at. Again, we can support students submitting these questions as well. Can be a really interesting and engaging activity for learners to be able to think critically and look at, what are valid assessment questions for the things that I'm learning in this chapter. It can be really illustrative for the educator to look at what the students are submitting and demonstrate how much they know and the quality of the questions that they create. But with my learning path or my adaptive chapter review I'm trying to create here, I've set up my learning objectives. I've pointed to where the content is. I've pointed to where some question settings are. And then I can make some quick, simple choices. I'm going to start with a diagnostic test, that prior knowledge assessment. If somebody already knows all of this stuff, again, I want to recognize them for that. I want to hide the content that's related to learning objectives that they've already mastered. I want things to get smaller as they've shown they've mastered everything and they can see that sort of burning down. That's another real key element of personalization, is seeing my personal progress as I go. And here I'm going to allow students to contribute content. That's what I was talking about before with adding their own pieces. And then again, a machine learning model goes through and aligns and correlates all of this content together. So in my chapter 1, you saw earlier I was talking about membranes. And so it's finding content for me and it's suggesting what's the most correlated, the most appropriate content. As the subject matter expert, I can always go in and change that if I wish. Or I can just see how that plays out as the students actually participate in this, and I get data coming back from real world use. So if I preview what an adaptive activity would look like for a student, I'm going to get my pre-test or my knowledge test. This is a really, really simple example. I'm just going to click a couple. And based on how I responded, I got 0 out of 4. So obviously I've got some work to do here. Immediately, the adaptive engine picks up that I did poorly on this question. It knows that this is talking about membranes. And from the content repositories that I picked out before, it's recommending reading to me. So it's personalizing a couple options that I can look at based on getting this question incorrect. And it's going to do that the same for all of these items here. And so now based on that prior learning assessment, I can go to my study plan and I've got access to my learning path. I've got a bunch of different content here that's going to help explain cell membranes, tonicity, everything that's in chapter 1. And as I'm going through and working with this, I can take a practice question, and it's going to give me a practice question on this content that I'm looking at. And again, as I submit it, I get immediate feedback, and it's going to tell me some recommended reading. I've always got alternative views of the content to look at. So before you saw me upload a bunch of alternative views of dynamic equations, here we've got different ways of representing the same content for cell membranes. Again, really important because different learners are going to be successful with different ways of representing an idea. And as a learner, I can see my progress over time. So I can look at how many times I've attempted questions, how well I'm doing, and as an educator, I can see all of those statistics rolled up for me. So another really interesting tool in the toolbox for how you can personalize learning and how you can take advantage of the scale that technology can afford in setting up and mindfully designing a personalized learning experience and then implementing that in a technology platform so that it can be delivered at scale and can be continuously improved based on data. There's so much more that can happen in a really well-designed online space to personalize an experience. I tried to meander around a lot of different examples, but hopefully that's a good taste of the types of things you can think about as you're trying to move towards higher sophistication, greater level of engagement with your learners. And for that, I will pause. So some of the questions that I'm seeing come through here. Tina's asking, how do we engage students in peer learning in the Brightspace platform? And not even necessarily specific to the Brightspace platform, but it's really in how you design your learning activities. So a lot of times we see peer learning happening with group projects. There's lots of options for how groups can actually be created in Brightspace or in LMSs in general. So, you know, if you want to allow for an element of self-selection from students to be able to form their own groups, if you want to randomize those or do it mindfully where you're providing you know, a mix of sort of mentors and those that need a little bit of help or encouragement. A lot of times we've seen tying a group or a peer activity off of you know, a piece of content or an activity that everybody did together can be effective as well. So that, you know, there's people that are asked to take different perspectives on a case study or a position paper that they've read. And so they're presenting different aspects of sort of a 360 picture can be beneficial. Peer learning can also be supported really well just by using some of the virtual classroom components. So there's a virtual classroom that's built into Brightspace. I didn't show it as part of this today, but it can be a really simple way just to connect with learners in a synchronous fashion. So some of my peers that I'm working with, I can connect with them. I can, you know, share screen. I can collaborate on work. And if it's necessary, I can go and submit that as an activity too. I hope that answers that question. How will you know the effectiveness of personalized learning in the students of 45 in a classroom? Is it not too hard for a teacher to be consistent doing this kind of strategy? You know, it's definitely not, it's not a simple undertaking to do this well. I highly recommend if you have access to instructional design resources at your institution, leverage them. They are experts in designing learning experiences that really drive towards the kind of outcomes that you're stating that you're trying to do. They're experts at marrying the the methodologies and the interactions that you want to have in your pedagogy to the capabilities of technology, and help you understand what kind of ways do you want to instrument that to see how your students are doing. 45 isn't too bad. I mean, we see some of these practices undertaken in classes of 1,000, and little things go a long way. There's a professor at Deakin University doing a large first year, I think it's a psychology course, and just the simple act of using those rule-based communications and just some, I think she uses hamster images, like some fun dancing hamsters, to acknowledge when students do their work and have made some progress, went an extremely long way to improving some of their retention and engagement numbers. So little differences go a long way. It doesn't have to be massive transformations. We also often advocate for take a +1 mindset. Find a small change that you can make that you think will be beneficial, monitor it, see if it's actually improving things, and then make the next +1 and continually improve things that way. May asks, with personalized learning, where can individual students see his or her own progress or set up an individual study plan? So creating that or seeing their individual progress, that progress tool that I showed before when I was in as a teacher, students have their own view of that as well. So they can see all of the assignments they've submitted, the feedback that they've received, the content that they've looked at, and how long they've spent on it. Excuse me. They also have access to a portfolio within Brightspace. And so that's where they can start to, outside of their normal coursework, they can start to think of capturing artifacts that sort of lay out, their individual learning goals. They can share that with their advisor or their the educators that they work with, and they can get feedback that, and they can collaborate on that study plan or that growth plan together. How does assessment happen given that learning is differentiated? How does one establish a grading system? That's a really, really good question. And that might be one for a deeper webinar to demo some of that. But there's lots of flexibility in an LMS like Brightspace that we showed. So you might have a grade item that's, group project, let's just call it. This is a bad example, but you've got a grade item for a group project. You might have 3 different activities that can feed a grade into that grade item. And you just choose, you tell that grade item, just take the one that comes in for students and drop the other 2 because they're going to be 0. And if a student decides that they want to do the group project or the project-based learning unit by submitting a video, then they submit a video, you score it with a rubric, and that goes to the grade item for them. If the student chose that they wanted to do a test at the end of that, and they wanted that to be their assessment vehicle, then the grade would be auto-graded and maybe manually graded through the quizzing tool, and its data would pass over to that grade item and be reflected there. It doesn't necessarily have to happen through grading. You could be tracking all of these things through mastery of learning outcomes. And each interaction an individual learner has with the learning outcome is shows towards their mastery or shows their progress towards that, regardless of whether it was one type of activity over another. Differentiating the learning doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're differentiating the assessment either. Again, in that crawl, walk, run sort of mindset, you might just want to start with providing alternative formats of your content. You might want to start with having videos and some interactive simulations if you can find them, and some text-based content. That's a valuable way to differentiate instruction as well before you go all the way through to assignments or assessments. Sorry. Tina, awesome question. How do we manage the stress level faced by learners using the online platform? This is one of the most common things we're having conversations with our customers and the people using our platform today. That idea of rules-based release of content that I showed before can be really, really valuable when we think of the cognitive load on a learner when they go into the LMS. If they go in and they see everything, they're going to be overwhelmed. You know, if they see, oh my gosh, there's chapter 1 and there's 5 activities there, and then chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. They're thinking of all the things. You know, they're not necessarily thinking of, where do I start? When you hold things back like that, if you create some of those rules that I showed before, you might just start with, hi Ken, start here. It's friendly, it's inviting, it's not discouraging because there's so much. And once I do my welcome introduction, maybe make a couple choices on a checklist, then I see unit 1. And so things can kind of open up and unfold in a planned and systematic fashion to try to manage some of that stress level by learners. The other thing I would recommend is talk to your students, get feedback from your students, and understand for them, where did they not understand things? Where do you need to maybe have clearer instructions or different formats for your instructions to help students get off on the right foot? Can the platform be used for homeschooling or providing home tutorials? Yeah, it can, Veronica. Actually, my 3 kids have been homeschooling for the last 4 months. 4 months? 3 months? 3 months since their school shut down. So I've been using the Brightspace platform to provide content and activities for my kids and a small little friend network of theirs. It's a really flexible and kind of open platform. So you design the experience for the type of learner you have and the goals for how you want to deliver to them. At any point as a teacher, do I have a dashboard where I can get data on a topic, topic-wise, students time-wise, activity-wise? Yes. So there's some of the out-of-the-box dashboard that I showed when we were in the class progress area. You know, I can quickly scan across all of the students, how long are they spending in content or a specific activity. I can drill down to a student and I can see how long did they spend on this individual content item, what feedback did I give them, and what files did they submit for an assessment. Or I could go to the activity and I could say, for maybe this quiz, show me all of the quiz attempts that have happened against this, and the scores and the grades against that. So there's always kind of a report at the activity or the item level. There's a report at the user level, and then there's kind of the aggregate ones that you can drill down into any of those from. There's a really large and really exciting package around data visualizations. So, you know, if you want to make things available to an administrator or a principal or an advisor that isn't in the LMS every day, but really needs to understand the data and interact with it, we've got some really nice ways to do that too. And again, it's based on rules. So, you know, you might look for, I want to know when the number of activities students complete goes down by 10% in a week. And I want you to warn me about it instead of me having to go look at reports. So trying to find the right way to get interactive data that you can gain insights from to the right people is constantly something that we're trying to solve for. Okay, I see that I'm at time. Thank you so much for everybody for hanging in there with me. I hope this was helpful for you. Best of luck to everybody in their journey in personalizing learning. Thank you.